John Wayne Gacy. Apparently, he looks like the man next door, the one who shook hands with politicians, threw neighborhood barbecues, and painted clown portraits to pass the time. John Wayne Gacy was born in Chicago on March 17, 1942. To the outside world, he was a successful building contractor, a Democratic Party precinct captain, and a man who dressed as Pogo the Clown to entertain children in hospitals. Who would question a man like that? Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy raped and murdered 33 boys and young men in his ranch-style home at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue in Norwood Park Township outside Chicago. He lured them with the promise of construction work or a simple magic trick involving handcuffs. Handcuffs his victims had no idea were real. 26 of the 33 were buried directly beneath his home, in the crawl space underneath his floorboards. His unraveling began in December 1978 when 15-year-old Robert Peast vanished after visiting Gacy about a job. Investigators found the house, they found the crawl space, they found what no one was prepared for. Gacy was convicted of 33 murders in March 1980, the highest number attributed to a single defendant in American legal history. He was executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. Osama bin Laden. He was not born into poverty, not shaped by deprivation, not forged in the desperation that history so often assigns to killers. He was born in 1957 into one of the wealthiest families in Saudi Arabia, the 17th of 52 children. His father, a billionaire construction magnate with direct ties to the royal family. What does it say about ideology when privilege becomes the very soil from which mass murder grows? Osama bin Laden grew up insulated by wealth, educated in Jeddah, and later at King Abdulaziz University, where his worldview began a radical transformation. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 became his turning point. He traveled to Pakistan, raised millions, recruited fighters, and positioned himself as a holy warrior, not with a rifle in hand, but with money, wise networks, and an uncanny ability to inspire allegiance. In 1988, he founded Al-Qaeda, an organization built not just for one war, but for a permanent global campaign. The 1998 bombings of American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania killed over 200 people. Then came September 11, 2001, nearly 3,000 lives erased in minutes. For nearly a decade, he evaded the world's most powerful intelligence apparatus. On the 2nd of May 2011, U.S. Navy SEALs ended his years of concealment inside a fortified compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. He was 54 years old. David Berkowitz. What kind of man spends his evenings counting the fires he set? Over 1,500 of them, and still considers himself ordinary. David Berkowitz was born Richard David Falco on June 1, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York. Surrendered at birth, adopted into a quiet Bronx household, he grew into a restless, deeply troubled young man. When his adoptive mother died of cancer in 1967, something inside him fractured and never fully healed. He joined the army in 1971, trained into a marksman of exceptional skill, then returned to civilian life carrying wounds no uniform could account for. By 1976, the voices had grown louder. He convinced himself his neighbor's black Labrador retriever was a demon channeling murder commands through its barks, so he obeyed. From July of 1976 to July of 1977, Berkowitz stalked the streets of New York City under cover of night, targeting young couples in parked cars with a .44 caliber revolver. 6 people were killed, 7 others were wounded. The city descended into a paralysis of collective dread. He taunted detectives with handwritten letters, signing each one Son of Sam. A single overlooked parking ticket near his final crime scene exposed him. He was arrested on August 10, 1977, outside his Yonkers apartment, reportedly smiling. He had sentenced an entire city to fear. The courts returned the favor with 365 years. Pablo Escobar. At the height of his power, he was moving so much cocaine into the United States that his accountants reportedly spent 20 hours a week doing nothing but counting cash. Rubber bands became a budget line. Rats ate through an estimated $2 billion in stored bills annually, and he considered it an acceptable loss. What kind of man measures his wealth not in numbers, but in the weight of paper he can afford to lose? Pablo Escobar was born in 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, into modest circumstances that he was determined would not define him. By his early 20s, he was smuggling contraband. By his 30s, he commanded the Medellin Cartel, an organization responsible for supplying an estimated 80% of the cocaine consumed in the United States at its peak. The means by which he maintained that empire were unambiguous. Politicians, judges, and police officers faced a simple proposition: accept his money or accept the consequences. Thousands of lives were claimed across Colombia through bombings, assassinations, and targeted killings. Entire institutions bent under the pressure he applied. Colombian and American authorities hunted him for years. On the 2nd of December 1993, security forces tracked him to a residential rooftop in Medellin. He was 44 years old. The chase was over. Ted Bundy. He worked at a suicide hotline, counseling people through their darkest moments, while quietly becoming the reason others would need one. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, and raised in Tacoma, Washington. He was educated, articulate, and destined by every visible measure for a distinguished career. He was even accepted into law school. How does someone like that become what Bundy became? Between 1974 and 1978, Bundy raped and murdered at least 30 young women and girls across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. His method was devastatingly simple. He would feign injury, a broken arm, a leg, and a fake cast, exploiting the natural instinct of women to help a man who seemed to be struggling. Once close enough, he struck. Bundy had removed the passenger seat from his tan 1968 Volkswagen Beetle, leaving an empty floor where his victims would disappear from the world without a sound. He escaped custody twice, once from a courthouse window in Aspen and again from his jail cell on December 30, 1977. Each escape bought him more victims. Florida ultimately stopped him. Convicted of 3 murders, Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair on January 24, 1989. Outside the prison, crowds cheered. Inside, one of history's most studied killers closed his eyes for the last time. Saddam Hussein. He was a child who watched his stepfather beat him before he could read. He was a teenager who slept on the streets of Baghdad with nothing but ambition and rage. Long before the world knew his name, Saddam Hussein had already decided that weakness was something he would never again allow himself to feel. Is it possible that the making of a dictator begins not in a palace, but in the dust of a childhood no one protected? Born in 1937 in the village of Al-Auja in northern Iraq, Saddam joined the Ba'ath Party at 20, driven by a hunger for political power that consumed everything around it. By 1968, the Ba'athists had seized control of Iraq, and Saddam quietly positioned himself as the real force behind the government. When he formally assumed the presidency in 1979, one of his first acts was to convene a meeting of senior party officials, then publicly execute those he had already marked as threats. What followed was a reign that lasted over 2 decades. The Anfal campaign in 1988 targeted Kurdish populations, killing an estimated 100,000 people. Chemical weapons were deployed against civilians in Halabja. Hundreds of thousands more perished in wars against Iran and Kuwait. He was captured on the 13th of December, 2003, found hiding in an underground pit near Tikrit. Jeffrey Dahmer. There is a particular kind of loneliness that does not ask for connection. It demands possession. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, into a middle-class household fractured by his parents' deteriorating marriage and his mother's mental illness. As a boy, he dissected roadkill out of curiosity. By the time his parents divorced and left him alone in the family home in Bath Township, Ohio, at the age of 18, that curiosity had already turned lethal. He committed his first murder in June 1978, weeks after high school graduation. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 boys and young men, most of them Black, Latino, or Asian, men whose disappearances drew little urgency from Milwaukee law enforcement. He would lure them with money or alcohol, drug their drinks, strangle them, and then dismember the bodies, preserving skulls, storing organs in his refrigerator, and in some cases consuming the flesh. He told investigators later that he killed because he was lonely. He did not want them to leave. In May 1991, a 14-year-old victim escaped his apartment naked and bleeding. Police returned the boy directly to Dahmer, dismissing the incident as a domestic dispute. The boy became Dahmer's 12th victim. Tracy Edwards finally ended it in July 1991. Dahmer received 15 consecutive life sentences. On November 28, 1994, a fellow inmate beat him to death in prison. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He held a doctorate in Islamic studies. He had memorized the Quran. By every academic measure, he was a scholar, a man whose years of study should have placed him among those who preserved life, not those who ended it. And yet, on the 29th of June, 2014, Ibrahim Awad Ibrahim al-Badri, known to the world as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, stood before a crowd in Mosul's great mosque of al-Nuri and declared himself caliph of all Muslims. How does a man of learning become the architect of so much ruin? Born in 1971 in Samarra, Iraq, al-Baghdadi's radicalization accelerated following the 2003 U.S. invasion. Detained at Camp Bakr, an American detention facility in Iraq, he spent time among some of the most extreme insurgent minds of that era. What emerged from that detention was a far more dangerous figure than the one who entered. He assumed leadership of what became the Islamic State, an organization that seized territory across Iraq and Syria, subjugating millions. Mass executions, the targeting of religious minorities, and the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war defined the group's governance. At its peak, the Islamic State controlled land the size of the United Kingdom. On the 26th of October, 2019, U.S. Special Forces cornered al-Baghdadi in northwestern Syria. He was 48 years old. Samuel Little. Most killers leave a trail. Samuel Little left a silence so complete that the world did not even know to go looking. Born Samuel McDowell on June 7, 1940, in Reynolds, Georgia, Little was abandoned as an infant by a teenage mother and raised by his grandmother in Lorain, Ohio. His criminal record began in 1956, shoplifting, fraud, breaking, and entering. Law enforcement encountered him repeatedly and let him go each time. Between 1970 and 2005, Little murdered 93 people across 19 states, from Miami to Los Angeles, making him the most prolific serial killer in American history. More than Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer combined. Nearly all of his victims were women, sex workers, substance users, the homeless, and the marginalized. And yet he chose them deliberately. He believed correctly that their disappearances would draw little attention. Many of their deaths were recorded as drug overdoses or accidents. Some bodies were never found. It was not until 2012 that a routine narcotics arrest in Kentucky unraveled everything. DNA connected him to 3 unsolved California homicides. Then, in May 2018, Texas Ranger James Holland sat across from him and listened for months as Little confessed to killing 93 people. City by city, state by state, with the calm recall of a man recounting a road trip. He died in prison on December 30, 2020. Dozens of his victims remain unidentified. Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. In the mountains of Sinaloa, Mexico, poverty was not a condition. It was a geography. The Sierra was remote, ungoverned, and indifferent to ambition. Yet it was here, in 1957, that Joaquín Archibaldo Guzmán Loera was born into circumstances so deprived that he was reportedly selling oranges and cannabis on the streets before he was a teenager. How many people grow up in those same mountains and choose a different path? And what was it about this particular boy that made him choose otherwise? By his 20s, Guzmán had embedded himself in the architecture of Mexican drug trafficking. He rose swiftly through the Guadalajara cartel before co-founding the Sinaloa cartel, which would grow into one of the most expansive narcotics organizations ever documented. Tunnels, submarines, debris and corrupted officials became the infrastructure of an empire that moved cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine across borders at a scale that overwhelmed law enforcement on multiple continents. He was first captured in 1993. He walked out of a maximum security prison in 2001. He was recaptured in 2014, then escaped again through a mile-long tunnel dug directly beneath his cell. Each disappearance deepened the myth. His final arrest came in January 2016. In 2019, a U.S. federal court sentenced him to life. Joel Rifkin. He was not charming. He was not handsome. He had no law degree, no political connections, no golden disguise. Joel David Rifkin was born on January 20, 1959, surrendered at birth by 2 unmarried college students, and adopted 3 weeks later by a structural engineer and his wife in East Meadow, Long Island. At school, classmates dunked his head in toilet bowls. Teammates stuffed a dead chicken in his mouth. He joined the yearbook club hoping for belonging and was not invited to the wrap-up party. What happens to a person shaped entirely by rejection? Between 1989 and 1993, Rifkin murdered 17 women across New York, most of them sex workers whose disappearances received little urgency from law enforcement. He strangled them, dismembered many, arsed and disposed of their remains in rivers, oil drums, and garbage bags scattered across Long Island and New Jersey. His first victim, Heidi Balk, was killed in 1989. Her severed head was found in a paint can near a New Jersey golf course. It would take 24 years for anyone to identify her. Rifkin was not stopped by investigators. He was stopped by a missing license plate. On June 28, 1993, state troopers pulled over his pickup truck on Long Island. The smell hit them before they even reached the window. Tiffany Bresciani's body lay in the bed. That night, Rifkin confessed to 17 murders. He was convicted of 9 and sentenced to 203 years in prison. Ramzi Yousef. He had no army. He had no state. He had no vast network of financiers watching over him. What Ramzi Yousef had was a mind that treated mass casualties as an engineering problem, and enough nerve to act on it alone. Before the world had fully absorbed the idea that a single individual could bring international terrorism to American soil, he had already done it. Born Abdul Basit Mahmoud Abdul Karim in Kuwait in 1968 to a Pakistani father, Yousef studied electrical engineering in Wales before disappearing into the world of extremist networks. He arrived in New York in September 1992, carrying a false Iraqi passport, and within months had assembled a team and a plan. On the 26th of February, 1993, a truck bomb detonated beneath the World Trade Center, and 6 people were killed and over 1,000 injured. His target had been the foundation columns. Had the angle of the blast shifted slightly, the towers could have fallen that day. 8 years before they eventually did. He fled the country hours after the attack. What followed were years of plotting across multiple continents, including a scheme to simultaneously destroy 12 commercial airliners mid-flight over the Pacific. He was captured in Islamabad in February 1995, found asleep in a guest house. He is currently serving a 240-year sentence. Dennis Rader. A man can sit in a church pew on Sunday and still carry a darkness no sermon ever reached. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and raised in Wichita, the same city he would spend 3 decades terrorizing. On the surface, the portrait was almost aggressively ordinary. A husband, a father of 2, a church council president, a compliance officer, and a Boy Scout troop leader. What lives underneath a man like that? On January 15, 1974, Rader broke into the home of the Otero family and strangled 4 of them, husband, wife, and 2 of their children, before going to work that same morning. He was laid off from his electrician job just months before. Over the following 17 years, he murdered 10 people across Wichita, binding and strangling each one. He called himself BTK, Bind, Torture, Kill, a name he coined himself in a letter he hid inside an engineering book at the Wichita Public Library. He vanished from police radar after 1991. Then in 2004, bored by a newspaper article declaring the case unsolved, he began taunting investigators again. He sent a floppy disk to a local television station, asking whether it could be traced. It could. Metadata on the disk led directly to his church computer. He was arrested on February 25, 2005. He received 10 consecutive life sentences, with no possibility of parole until the year 2180. Richard Ramirez. Some fears are abstract. In the summer of 1985, the fear that gripped Los Angeles was not. It lived in every unlocked window, every darkened hallway, every home where someone forgot to draw the curtain before going to sleep. Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960 in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 5 children born to Mexican immigrant parents. As a boy, he watched his cousin, a Vietnam War veteran, boast about war crimes over photographs of the women he had abused. At 13, he watched that same cousin shoot his wife in the face. Between June 1984 and August 1985, Ramirez broke into homes across Los Angeles and San Francisco, murdering at least 13 people. He had no consistent type. His victims ranged from 6 years old to 83, men, women, and children. Some were shot, some were strangled, some were beaten. At crime scenes, he left pentagrams drawn in lipstick on the walls. He called himself the Night Stalker, a name first given to him by the press that he eventually embraced as his own identity. His capture came not from detectives, but from ordinary people. On August 31, 1985, residents of East Los Angeles recognized his face from the newspaper, chased him down a street, and held him until police arrived. He was convicted on September 20, 1989. When the judge sentenced him to death, Ramirez shrugged. Big deal. Death always went with the territory. He died in prison from cancer on June 7, 2013. Gary Ridgway. He did not look like a threat. He worked a steady job painting trucks at the Kenworth factory in Renton, Washington. He went to church. He showed photographs of his son to women he met on the street, to put them at ease, to make himself seem safe. Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, raised in a troubled household near Seattle's Pacific Highway. As a teenager, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy in the woods. The boy survived and walked away without consequence. That lesson, apparently, stayed with him. Between 1982 and 1998, Ridgway raped and strangled 49 women and girls across King County, Washington. Nearly all were runaways or sex workers. Women he deliberately chose because, as he later admitted, he believed nobody would come looking. He returned to their bodies afterward. He planted cigarette butts and chewing gum wrappers at dump sites to mislead investigators. He passed a lie detector test in 1984. He was interviewed by detectives and released. He kept killing. A DNA sample collected in 1987 sat unmatched for 14 years. Advances in forensic technology eventually connected it to semen recovered from 4 victims. He was arrested on November 30, 2001, leaving the Kenworth factory after a shift. To avoid the death penalty, he led investigators to the graves of his remaining victims. He received 49 consecutive life sentences. Some of his victims still have no names. Aileen Wuornos. Every life tells a story before the headlines do. Aileen Carol Wuornos was born on February 29, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, into a family that had already given her every reason to distrust the world. Her father, a convicted child molester, never met her. Her mother abandoned her and her brother Keith when Aileen was not yet 4 years old. She was raised by grandparents who drank heavily. She was pregnant at 14. By the time she was a teenager, the streets were more familiar to her than any home had ever been. Between November 1989 and November 1990, Wuornos shot and killed 7 men along the highways of Central Florida while working as a sex worker. She claimed each one had assaulted or attempted to assault her. Her first victim, Richard Mallory, was later confirmed to have previously served prison time for violent rape in Maryland, a detail investigators had access to but never pursued. That fact never made it into her trial. She was arrested on January 9, 1991 at a biker bar called The Last Resort in Port Orange, Florida. Her partner, Tyria Moore, was granted immunity in exchange for helping police obtain a confession. When the jury convicted her, Wuornos stood up and screamed at them. She was executed on October 9, 2002. She declined her final meal. She had only a cup of coffee.